Welcome to another edition of the Big News Roundup. I'm Bill Thomas, and here's what's going on right now. Ilhan Omar says Democrats are planning to dismantle the Department of Homeland Security. The Supreme Court deals President Trump's tariff policy an enormous blow. Zohran Mamdani aims to defund the NYPD, and 94-year-old Captain Kirk prepares to release a heavy metal extravaganza. All this and a bunch more is coming up right now on the Big Roundup. Hey, we have a great deal to get to today, and we open with this. In a stunning revelation, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar now admits that Democrats nationwide are dead set on completely dismantling our nation's critical Department of Homeland Security. Now, I'm just thinking out loud, but maybe she ought to shut down one or two Starbucks locations first, then kind of work her way up. At her most recent town hall meeting in Minneapolis, the Somalia-born lawmaker finally showed her cards by revealing that in addition to totally abolishing ICE, both she and her cronies are presently conspiring to eliminate one of the most vital security agencies in our entire country. Omar brags that thanks to recent events, having a legitimate conversation about changing our nation's immigration enforcement policy, including by actually demolishing both ICE and DHS, is a heck of a lot easier than it was when she first entered Congress several years ago. I remember that day. It was a dark day in our nation's long and storied history. You know, even more alarmingly, she goes on to confess that right now she and her fellow Dems are already planning for life after DHS by discussing in great detail exactly how our government will continue to operate after the department has been completely disbanded. Yeah, what could possibly go wrong? Furthermore, Omar claims that a complete reboot is needed because right now the brutal agencies which are currently operating under the DHS umbrella are terrorizing communities and having zero accountability for their actions. What she's really trying to say is that she wholesale objects to law and order. She also argues that the problem has now become unfixable, and as a result, time to roll back the clock, start from scratch, and figure out a different system altogether. By the way, Omar's latest inflammatory remarks come as a partial government shutdown barrels toward a second week with no end in sight. In order to get things moving again, stubborn Democrats, they are holding out for new limits on ICE, which includes banning masks on agents, forcing them to wear body cameras, and requiring them to obtain warrants before making any arrests at all. Final thoughts, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Here's the way it all pans out. And to begin with, this Ilhan Omar creature, she's the reason there are warning labels on wheelbarrows that say not for use on the highway. Now, with regard to abolishing ICE and dismantling the Department of Homeland Security, think it through and look at who's leading the charge for the big change and why. First off, the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, created in response to the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and the purpose of DHS is to secure the nation from threats including terrorism, border security, cybersecurity, and a bunch more. Yeah, I read up on that. Under DHS, of course, is ICE, our Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Their mission, protect America through criminal investigations and enforcing immigration laws, all to preserve national security and public safety. Well, where's the problem, man? Now, Ms. Omar, yes, the one I affectionately always refer to as my little bucket of sunshine.
It's my little bucket of sunshine.
If these agencies are so evil, if they're so bad for our country, why weren't they abolished and dismantled during one of Barack Obama's two administrations or during Joe Biden's administration? Just a goofy point of curiosity, I suppose. So her demented plan is part of a two-part scam, and here's how it all works. Abolish ICE and ensure a safe haven for tens of millions of illegal immigrants to come on over to the U.S. and do to the country what many of them have already done in Minnesota and elsewhere. Part two, dismantle DHS and open the doors of opportunity for terrorists from every corner of the planet. I say this, Ilhan Omar should be charged with the crime of congressional malpractice. And if it doesn't exist, it does now. And she ought to resign her position effective immediately. Turning now to the shocking decision by the U.S. Supreme Court to strike down President Trump's use of an Emergency Powers Act, all in order to impose widespread tariffs on many of our country's leading trading partners. In a surprising 6-3 vote, the judges ruled that relying on a measure called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act does not give Trump the authority to level those types of broad and sweeping charges on foreign imports. Thanks, Supreme Court. I'll tell you, you're beginning to drag me down. Speaking for the court's majority, Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts points out that the aforementioned act does not include any mention of tariffs or duties at all. Also says that when they wrote the Constitution, our nation's founding fathers reserved that power for Congress alone. As a result of that big decision, the rules concerning our nation's global trade agreements now seem to be in complete disarray. Additionally, the Trump administration now potentially faces the grim prospect of repaying tens of billions of dollars in reimbursements, although for now, that process remains entirely up in the air. In the meantime, as can be expected, President Trump is absolutely furious about the ruling. I am too, by the way. And he says the decision is deeply disappointing and completely incorrect. That is a shame because certain unpatriotic members of the courts, they were so disloyal to the Constitution, and that the announcement now threatens to bring great uncertainty to the entire world economy. Apparently, the president still has a few tricks up his sleeve as well, and says that moving forward, he plans to begin by signing an executive order which will impose a new 10% global tariff to replace the ones that were struck down. However, it is worth noting that under the law, those new tariffs will be temporary and limited to just 150 days before they can potentially be extended any further. Now, on the other hand, opponents of the president's tariff policies rejoicing wildly over the court's decision, and they're calling it a total victory for the American people. Well, no, it's really not. All while simultaneously demanding that the Trump administration undo the massive damage they've already caused by issuing an immediate refund for their so-called illegal tax. Those are some fine Americans for you. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Here's the way I see it, and the Supreme Court might not like to hear it, but here goes. Because Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the majority opinion on all his tariff nonsense, he will not be receiving an official News Roundup Christmas card on or shortly before 12/25/26. It's a harsh penalty, but when you go against 47, you kind of go against me as well, and the best way for me to show my displeasure is to not give you a News Roundup Christmas card. Now, look, we've been on the losing end of trade deals with so many countries for so long that it just became kind of an acceptable thing, an acceptable way of doing business. All until 47 came along and dolled things up just a little bit. As a result of sweeping tariffs with many, if not all of our trading partners, the game has changed. We're no longer getting sucker punched by literally dozens of nations, and at the same time, we've generated billions and billions of dollars for the USA, for the homeland. And by the way, there was even some chatter coming out of the White House recently regarding $2,000 tariff dividend checks to be doled out to each and every one of us sometime later this year. However, now that the High Court has just changed the game, kind of feels like we all just kind of lost out on what was sounding like a pretty juicy little windfall. Bottom line, and this is going to affect your bottom line, ixnay on the extra dough, forget about paying down those bills, break out the hamburger helper, and don't even think about a summer vacation. Thank you, Supreme Court. Back to square one again, with the whole world getting the upper hand on the good old USA, jipping us at every possible intersection and laughing at our out-of-control national debt, which is rapidly approaching $39 trillion. We'll switch things up just a bit now, shift our focus to the Big Apple, where gobsmacked residents are finally waking up to the dire consequences of putting a self-proclaimed socialist in charge of our nation's largest city. Good job, New York, and don't say I didn't warn you. In a complete slap in the face to law enforcement, Mayor Zohran Mamdani is now doubling down on his radical defund the police policies by proposing extreme budget cuts for the New York Police Department, the NYPD. The boys in blue. NYPD Blue. NYPD Blue. That might be a good name for a TV show. I'm on to something. According to reports, in order to make ends meet, the 34-year-old mayor looking to reduce the NYPD's upcoming budget by a whopping $22 million in order to save his struggling city a bit of cash, which he can then apply to his outrageous socialist policies. Good job. Meanwhile, here's another swift kick in the teeth. He's already rolled back previous plans to hire 5,000 additional desperately needed officers to the force, placing a severe limit on the number of New York City cops who will eventually be available to protect their highly vulnerable citizens. And so you know, Mamdani's radical approach to governing is currently under an extreme magnifying glass following the recent release of his massive and bloated $127 billion budget for 2027. You know, the petulant mayor says now that unless his demands are immediately met, sounds like a kidnapper, for a huge statewide tax hike on the rich, he'll simply be forced to increase property taxes on everyone in order to solve the Big Apple's unprecedented budget problems. Mamdani goes on to claim that when he moved into the mayor's mansion, that, by the way, is what they call free housing, he inherited a historic budget gap, which he had nothing to do with creating at all. He also says that nothing about his current situation is typical, that he's nothing like his predecessors either, and that when they're implemented, his radical solutions are somehow going to be extraordinary as well. Meanwhile, a growing number of media sources nationwide finally waking up to the reality, smelling that coffee a-brewing, and coming to the conclusion that Mamdani is out of his mind when it comes to reckless spending. That's not his money. In a blistering recent op-ed piece, the Washington Post sums it up best when they point out that his bloated budget, which happens to be larger than that of 47 U.S. states, would force his city's residents to foot the bill for funding his socialist policies. They say that while Americans love the idea of getting a bunch of free stuff, that's how socialists get elected, after all. In the end, people are much less enthusiastic when they find out they're the ones who have to foot the bill. And I think they call that buyer's remorse. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Now, I don't know a great deal about New York City, but to the best of my knowledge, it's most likely one of the safest cities in the country, if not the world. Therefore, perhaps this fiscally responsible young fella, this Mayor Mamdani guy, is on the right track. And why waste a bunch of dough on more cops? Now, look, I'm not exactly a dollars and cents kind of camper, but reducing the number of bobbies on patrol while at the same time cutting the budget for that little town's police department all sounds like pretty good business to me. Also, for those who would argue that all manner of violent crime will increase due to fewer constables on the beat and less money to pay them, I say this. A couple of years ago, I, myself, your News Roundup host, spent 3 days in New York. I didn't get mugged, carjacked, kidnapped, or murdered. Yeah, 3 whole days. So are cops really necessary? I don't think so. I say bench the fuzz, cut their resources, hope for the best, and I think everything's going to be just fine. Oh, yeah, and there's this. Hey, Zohran the Wonderful. If you also get rid of the squad cars and the guns, which the cops don't really need after all, that's another big money saver. I'm here to help. And by the way, this good guy mayor has a couple more trips up his long sleeve hammer and sickle shirt. For example, double-digit property tax increases and more taxes on the rich folk. Look, he may just be a small-town mayor right now, but one day, I say Comrade Mamdani could become the next president of Russia. This guy, I'll tell you what, he just gets it. Pivoting now to the international front and a stark warning from business leaders in Europe concerning what they call unfair and destabilizing trade practices by the Chinese Communist regime. The Chinese Communist regime? Unfair? Who'd have thunk? In a thought-provoking new report, a powerful German lobbying group accuses China of intentionally executing a number of unscrupulous business practices, and among them, providing massive subsidies, encouraging overproduction, politically motivated export controls, and a bunch more. We only have so much time today. Furthermore, they argue that by purposely intensifying their predatory policies, the communist regime, they're now threatening to undermine prosperity and security throughout the entire continent of Europe. As a result, they're urging all of Europe to unify and prepare what they call a robust response to the communist threat, and they warn that unless something is done about it in the very near future, we can all expect to see massive trade conflicts, a global price war, and a bunch more. Now, some additional headlines we're also keeping a very close watch on here in the News Roundup newsroom as that weekend rapidly approaches. Maybe it's already here. I lost track. First up, President Trump is jumping on the bandwagon and criticizing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for her boneheaded remarks at the recent Munich security conference, saying that he simply had no idea she was so stupid when it comes to foreign policy. And I'm calling foul on that. I think 47 has always known. Moving along, a new poll shows that our neighbors to the north in Canada now think that the U.S. is the greatest threat to world peace on the entire planet. They also say our two countries no longer share the same values, that we're no longer a reliable ally, and that we're more likely to create problems for other countries than to solve them. I say watch your step and behave, Canada. You'll be singing a different tune when one day you become our 51st state. I actually like Canada. They have great soda pop. Canada Dry. Love the ginger ale. And in a bit of a follow-up to a story we shared with you yesterday right here on the program, President Trump now says that in the near future, he plans to release a large batch of government files related to the existence of UFOs, extraterrestrials, alien life forms, and a bunch more. I just adore some good old UFO talk over a tall glass of Ovaltine and a hot chicken burrito. And now a quick gander at a bit of showbiz news, kicking things off today with a story that gives new meaning to the old adage, say goodbye to Hollywood. After more than a half a century in sunny California, legendary director Steven Spielberg, I've heard of him, and his lovely wife, Kate Capshaw, now packing up their bags and moving to a deluxe apartment in New York City, reportedly to be closer to their children and to their grandchildren as well. I'll say I really like this Mr. Spielberg fella and all those nifty movies he makes. The odd thing is, Mr. Spielberg, actually I just call him Steven. Steven and I are actually neighbors here, so this hit me kind of hard today. For clarity, when I say we're neighbors, I'm not saying he lives like immediately right next door, but he and I both live in California, so in my brain, that kind of makes us neighbors. And I hope he still calls once in a while after he sets up shop in New York. And I hope he also knows that Mayor Mamdani is going to tax the living daylights out of him and his business. Turning now to a world-famous 94-year-old starship captain who brags that after decades in showbiz, he's still willing to go where no man has ever gone before. The original Captain Kirk himself, Star Trek's William Shatner, revealing that right now he's stepping out into the unknown once again by recording his very first heavy metal album, adding that he'll be joined on his upcoming voyage by a star-studded lineup, including dozens of well-known rock legends as well. America, what you're looking at right now is a war. This is a hardcore heavy metal war, and here's the deal. Now, back in 1997, the legendary crooner Pat Boone released a CD called In a Metal Mood, No More Mr. Nice Guy. It covered a bunch of songs from Metallica, Ozzy Osbourne, Guns N' Roses, and a bunch more. Not to be outdone, Mr. Shatner, and Bill, if you will, is getting ready to annihilate Mr. Boone, and odds are Captain Kirk will dominate Spotify in just a matter of weeks. Game on, and may the best heavy metal rocker win. And by the way, what kind of metal rocker are you? Are you a Pat Boone kind of guy or Mr. Shatner kind of guy? Leave us a comment. And with that, it's time for us to call it a wrap on the Big News Roundup. Have an awesome day today. Enjoy the weekend. Stay safe as well. And if you haven't done so already, it's right there, the subscribe button. Just hit it once or twice. And with that, we're going to dim the lights, going to fade to black, ease into the weekend, and we'll see you right back here next time for a brand new episode of the Big News Roundup.